Paul, we're thinking about the thorny companion that we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And this is what Paul says: I must go on boasting. Although there is nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself. I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth, but I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I say.
Or because of the surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more greatly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That's why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
Okay, so we're thinking about really the thorn in the flesh. And the thorn in
Yes,
the flesh is a phrase of the New Testament origin describing really an annoyance or a trouble in one's life, drawn from the Apostle Paul's use of the phrase in his second epistle in the Corinthians there. And Paul had this thorn in the flesh that was given to him, and Paul had a revelation himself. He had revelations from the Lord and said he was not permitted to tell. And you just read those verses there, Paul, for us. And so he was unsure, wasn't he, if the vision of heaven was a real experience, or he talks about when in Lystra, where the people left him for dead, and he appeared dead, because this is what we read in Acts 14, verses 19 to 20. The disciples were there when Paul was beaten in Lystra, and God raised him up. Then they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing he was dead. But as the disciples stood around him, he rose up and entered into the city. On the next day, he left with Barnabas for Derbe.
so that could have been the time when Paul was caught up into the heavens, and he wasn't sure if he was in the body or out of the body. So that's interesting,
Yeah.
because it shows us that, that when we are out of the body, it seems like we could be in the body. It's that real, the spiritual experience. Because we get so used to being in this body, don't we? We want tangible things around us that we can feel and hold on to, and they kind of give us a security. But the Bible does teach us that don't fear those who can kill the body. Fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. So a spiritual experience like Paul had, it was a very real one. And of course the point of the thorn in the flesh is when Paul came back to earth, to this earthly realm, this worldly realm, where there's, people's pride mounts up, and we all have to be careful of that, every one of us, and some more than others, because those who are given to be public speakers, for instance, they can think, oh, God's chosen me to be a public speaker. Or something like that. And so Paul, he wasn't immune to the flesh, where we all have this fallen flesh.
Yeah.
And the body hasn't been redeemed yet. Our souls have been redeemed, but the body still pulls us this way and that way. So Paul was given this thorn, and he points out it's to stop him becoming conceited. Can I just say that when I've read about people who've God used, like Spurgeon, for instance,
Yeah.
everything was going great for Spurgeon. He was a young man, he was a young preacher, he moved to London, everything was going well. Loads of people were coming to hear him. They hired out this new amphitheatre. It was all kind of made of glass, and it was marvellous. And then some thugs got in who wanted to cause problems, and three of them scattered at different places on the balcony, started shouting, "Fire! Fire!" And pandemonium was brought loose, and people, in their efforts to get down the stairs, some fell and they died.
Yeah, sad.
And this was such a profound experience for Spurgeon. It just knocked him off his feet. And he was actually, I think he was in bed for a week, although it didn't affect him in any physical way because he was on the platform.
Yeah.
But he saw it, and it affected him so much. And I think he was always aware of that afterwards. So each one of us in different ways have a thorn in the flesh. What do you think about that, Jeannie?
Yes, I would agree with you there. I mean, that must have been a terrible shock to Charles Spurgeon,
Yeah,
that happening.
yeah.
And it must have been, knowing that people had died unnecessarily, that must have been a real thorn in the flesh for him, I would say.
And it did affect his flesh as well, even though it was only something that happened mentally to him. He just saw it. Yeah, it knocked his flesh off his feet.
Yeah. Do you think that we all get thorns in the flesh, Paul?
I do, yeah, I do tend to think that. I think it's different for every person, of course, but some way, somehow, the Lord helps us in stopping us becoming too proud. And that it's a mercy from God.
Yeah.
If only we could see it.
And a reliance on God, would you say, as well?
Well, it makes us rely on God, doesn't it? Because when we realise this body is not so strong as we thought it was, that we can't just swagger about the place like we used to,
Yeah.
then the Lord graciously shows us, hey, wait a minute, you're not so strong as you think you are. Let me show you. And he gives us these different thorns in the flesh. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because Paul goes on to say that he was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. Interesting. So Paul, he couldn't talk about the things he'd seen or heard. And his character seems that, he'd gone through so many trials, yet he had visions and revelations and a thorn in the flesh. And he has had a revelation of heaven, as we read in verse 7. And I'll just remind us of that. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surprisingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. What do you make of that?
Well, I noticed that it's working because Paul refers to himself in the third person.
Yeah.
When he starts talking about this, he says, I knew a man in Christ who was caught up to heaven. He's not going to say, I was caught up to heaven.
No.
You should have seen me. You should have been there. You should have seen this. He's not anything like that. He's saying, no, I knew a man and he was the man, of course. But he talks himself in a very humble way. It's like the ancient people used to address kings in the third person, didn't they? They would go to the king and they would say, your servant is very humble to be here today. They wouldn't say,
No.
I am very humble to be here. They wouldn't say that. They'd even speak of themselves, in the third person. And that's what Paul does here.
Yeah. I mean, he could have got proud, couldn't he?
He could have, yeah.
But he didn't.
No, and he gives us the reason why he didn't. Because he had a constant reminder, yeah. And we get a few ideas of what Paul's thorn in the flesh was, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, because people sometimes wonder about the thorn in the flesh. And I know from verse 8, we read that he said, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away. So here Paul is pleading with the Lord 3 times. But what did God say? God said to him, my grace is sufficient for you. And I think because of these, say, amazing revelations that Paul had, I guess that it helped him not to become conceited by having this thorn in the flesh. And he goes on to say, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. So it seems to me that Paul is saying that he feels Satan is there to torment him. I mean, what is the thorn? What's your take?
It is a messenger of Satan, but it was probably a physical thing. But Satan will use physical things if he can, because we think of Job. He had circumstantial problems, but he also had physical problems, all brought to him by Satan. So if Satan can, if he's given leave to do so, he will harm to a point. It can only go as far as the Lord allows him to go. But with Paul here, we read that it was in the flesh. It was something in the flesh. Paul points that out. He says this is a fleshly thing, and he didn't tell us what it was, because sometimes you don't always want to tell people your ailments, do you?
No.
But we do get a few clues. It looks like it was something to do with Paul's eyes.
Yeah.
And he mentions a few times, about things about his eyes. And he did have an experience early on when he became a Christian, where the light shone so bright.
Yes.
It blinded him for 3 days, and Ananias prayed for him. Something like scales fell off his eyes. But even so, we get the feel that his eyes weren't great after that. He could see heavenly things, and praise God, he wrote them all down for us. But seeing earthly things wasn't so easy. And people in the Old Testament often who saw the Lord, they had problems with their eyes. Isaac, Jacob, a few different people. Yeah. And we read it, Leah had something wrong with her eyes, didn't she, as well? It's like there's something there. If people have seen the Lord in some way, apart from Moses, we don't read that he did.
No,
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 but
no.
so Paul seems to have had something where he saw the glory of God, and it was a reminder ever since after that.
Yeah. And we read Paul in Galatians 6:11. It talks about writing large letters, which indicates his vision was affected in some way.
Yeah, because if you're writing and your eyes are not so great, yeah, you would use big letters. I can understand that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I know that some people say that because he had opposition when he was in Lystra, it was a physical thing, that he was left for dead, and I mean, could this refer to Satan or people opposing Paul?
as the result of the thorn in the flesh. You
Yeah.
mean the stoning?
Yeah, that's what
Well,
some people think.
yeah, it's a possibility, isn't it? But I would
Yeah.
think God raised him up, and he raised him up. When God raises you up, he usually raises you up pretty good. Jesus rose from the dead, and he was good.
Yeah,
Lazarus rose
exactly.
from the dead, and he was whole.
Yeah,
You
that's
know, so
right. Yeah.
so I would think if the Lord raised Paul up, he was whole,
Yes.
because the
Yeah.
Lord, it was a thing that the Lord did, raised him up. So I can see why some people say that, but it looks like he had some sort of eye condition.
Yes, I would agree with you there. And I think also, I mean, a thorn, say, can be a physical thing or a trial. I mean, it could be an emotional thing, and we can learn from it. And we know that God taught Paul things as well. But how do we deal, do you think, with those thorns in our own life? Because they're not very nice, are they? I mean, we've been out picking blackberries, haven't we? And ouch, the
Yeah, yeah,
thorns, you know?
yeah. There's a cost to picking the blackberries usually. You think,
There
I'm going to
certainly
be
is.
really careful this time, but somehow we always seem to get snagged. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. That's right. And you hear sometimes people saying, oh, that person is my thorn in the flesh. But I think mostly people see it as something painful, and and maybe a trial that they go through. It's easy when everything's hunky dory and the going's good. It's easy to rejoice and hold on to the Lord. But sometimes when the going is tough, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
And I mean, Paul was suffering.
yeah. And that was what Ananias did actually say to him,
Yeah,
because the Lord told Ananias, go and tell Paul, or Saul as he was then, how much he must suffer on my name. And he did write about, the sufferings. He joins in with the sufferings of Christ, and Paul was chosen to suffer. And so that was part of Paul's journey. And because he'd been so far away from the Lord, full of pride, a Pharisee,
yeah,
and he counted it all nothing. The thorn in the flesh helped Paul get things into perspective, and it helps us also. The Bible does say, "Be patient in affliction," and that's it with a thorn in the flesh. Patient in affliction. It's not always going to be there. Maybe it's just if you've got a splint in your body and you touch a wall where the splint is, or something, you go, "Ow! Oh, I forgot I've got a splint." And so it's not something that's always there, but it rears its head, and it rears its head often, and it teaches us, and it pleases the Lord when we are humble before Him. So a thorn in the flesh does teach us humility.
yes, yeah,
And also, if we could just think about this phrase that Paul said, he said he saw things he was not permitted to tell.
yeah. I find that very interesting.
So that is interesting, but he tells us enough to be intrigued, but he
Yeah,
doesn't tell us enough to what exactly those things were. Now,
no,
when James Peter and John were on the mountain of transfiguration with Jesus, they saw some amazing things.
Mm.
But Jesus said to them, don't tell anybody until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. And they probably didn't understand that, but they knew they were not to tell what they'd seen. And so Paul was in a similar position here. He could let us know that there were things there that somehow we can't grasp or understand in the laws of physics that we know that fit into this world. But there is something there, and it's tremendous. And you know, the Psalms tell us at his right hand there are pleasures forevermore. And Paul saw something of this. And let's remember that he is the apostle to the Gentiles. So he was caught up, and he did see things. He saw things about the future.
Yeah.
Because he writes about the future. He gives us prophetic warnings in Thessalonians about, you know, the man of sin, and he's being held back until the time when he will be revealed. So Paul, he is blessed. Let's remember that as well. You only get a thorn in the flesh because you've been blessed. You've had a revelation. So some people say, you know, oh, why doesn't the Lord appear to me? You don't know the thorn in the flesh you'd get after that. You know, because we'd rise up, our spirits, our fallen nature rises up so much so in pride.
I think those who do testify in their difficulties do see that as a gift, you know, because in our weakness we find strength in the Lord.
Yeah. And the Lord's very gracious with us, and we have to, those who've got a thorn in the flesh do have to thank him, say, Lord, thank you that I've got a thorn in the flesh. And it may take quite a long time to get to that point.
Yeah. It's not something that happens overnight.
No. But we're grateful that the Lord is with us every step of the way, even in those thorns in the flesh.
A good place to finish.
Okay.